With me is technologist Matthew Dickerson. Good morning, Matthew. How are you?
Good morning, Chris. Great to be chatting to you again.
Yes. Smarter cars making us dumber drivers.
It does sound a bit harsh, doesn't it? And maybe dumber drivers is maybe a bit too harsh on people, but certainly becoming more complacent drivers. And some driving instructors are talking about the fact that we've got all these wonderful bits of technology on a modern motor vehicle, and so people start to rely on that technology more than relying on basic safety skills. And one of the instructors in particular talked about almost 40 years ago, they started in the driving instructor game, and of course we didn't have ABS, we didn't have the same sort of radar controls on our cars, we didn't even have the same sort of tyres on our cars. So people had to learn to keep control of a car. Now we're starting to rely on those things, and even though various manufacturers are going along the autonomous driving path, they're not quite there yet, so they still need a human to be somewhat in control. One of the stats that the driving instructors pointed to as being an indication that people are paying less attention at the wheel rather than more is the fact that 30% of all crashes are rear-end crashes. And the logic from driving instructors there was that you're relying on some of the radar warnings to tell you if you're getting too close to the car in front of you or that the car in front of you is slowing down, so you're not paying as much attention to that car in front, and before you know it, you've run into the back of someone. That could also be checking technology in our car, for example, checking our mobile phones in our car, which hopefully people are doing less and less of now. But the motor vehicle crash industry in Australia is a $27 billion a year industry. So if we could reduce those crashes, get people to pay a bit more attention, that'd be a fantastic thing. But maybe we are losing some of our driving skills because of all this wonderful technology.
On to the mobile phone wars. Which company has revisited the top of the number one phone maker after an absence of 4 years, Matthew?
Yeah, well, look, an apple a day keeps Samsung at bay. Samsung have been the top seller across the world for a number of years now, and they take great delight in the fact that they've been ahead of Apple for many years. Apple obviously has a pretty good reputation and a pretty good name, but Samsung, by virtue of the fact that they sell a greater variety of phones, whereas iPhones or Apple just sells the iPhone, the higher end phones, they sell more phones by number across the world. But in the fourth quarter of last year, of the 2020 calendar year, Apple snuck ahead of Samsung, mainly on the back of their 4 different iPhone 12s that came out, their 5G phones. But Apple shipped 72.9 million phones, which just seems like an incredible number to me, Chris. Samsung came in second with 62.1 million. Xiaomi, Oppo and Huawei were third, fourth and fifth. Huawei sales were hit 41.1%. They were down with US government sections hitting pretty hard there. So overall sales declined by 5.4%, given the fact that we were just starting to maybe come out of the pandemic a little bit. That wasn't too bad for phone manufacturers. But overall for the year, Samsung still stayed on top for the calendar year. 253 million phones they sold over the year. Apple came in second at 199 million phones.
Well, on to streaming services. Now, do you pay for your streaming services such as Netflix, Stan and Disney Plus?
Yeah, I do pay for mine, but I've got some moochers called my kids who do like to use some of mine. The data's come out, and there's approximately half of people using streaming services, like the ones you mentioned, that aren't paying for them in Australia. And that's not a big deal. Often those services you can buy in multi-screen format, so you are allowed to have more than one user. But it's quite interesting that you've got 88% of Australians who are watching streaming services, but around half of those aren't actually paying for them. Not surprisingly here at all, Gen Z were the biggest freeloaders. And they're, again, I put my kids directly in that category. 75% of Gen Z said the service they use isn't in their name and they're not paying for it. Gen X were the next biggest freeloaders, 51%. And 38% of Gen Y said they use someone else's account. So it is interesting that people are using it and are happy to use it, especially while it's free. Netflix is our number one streaming service for this nation. 69% of Aussies are using this service, which isn't a bad market share to have for any company. Of course, people can have more than one. So 36% of people are using Stan as well, number 2. But it's interesting there that Netflix doubles or almost doubles its nearest competitor in Stan. So free-to-air TV, it's a tough game at the moment, I would say, given the fact that 63% of Australians said they watched more streaming content during the pandemic. So, I wouldn't like to be trying to sell advertising in the free-to-air space at the moment.
Yes, I am a Netflix subscriber, and my son freeloads on me there. But I've been watching, mate, that SBS platform lately. They've got some great shows. What's it called? SBS?
SBS On Demand, I think they call.
On Demand. Yeah,
that's
they're
right.
pretty good.
And all the free-to-air channels are doing that now, Chris, where they've got some form of ability to stream some of their shows, not all of their shows, but some of their popular shows. But they've realised that they can't just try and exist just on free-to-air alone. So they've basically moved into some of those streaming services as well.
Yeah, SBS On Demand. They're really good with the shows, a great variety, but they do have advertising during the shows, but that's not so bad. You go and make a cuppa, whatever.
No, that's right. And look, that's a different model, isn't it? You pay for Netflix and there's not ads that you see, and you go and use some of the free-to-air streaming services and they're still free, but then you've got some advertising that pays for those. So, yeah, look, it's a different model, a different mix, but it gives consumers a huge amount of choice. There's so much TV to watch, Chris. You need more hours in the day just to get through it all.
That's right. Now, Apple is updating iOS to 14.5. Why are users happy and Facebook furious?
Facebook's a bit angry about everything these days, Chris. I think they seem to be an angry company. But the great thing about 14.5 is that in the past, if you ask Siri to play some music for you, it would always use Apple Music. And some people were a bit frustrated by that. Apple was essentially making choices for some of the things that you would use on your phone. But now with the latest iOS, which isn't out yet, will be out probably in the next week, then with that, if you've got a different preferred music app, if you use Spotify, for example, then when you ask Siri to play some music, it will automatically play from Spotify, from whatever your default music app is. And this is, I suppose, another step down the path of giving people more choice. And what we've seen is that people get very angry and annoyed if you don't allow them to have some choice. Now, a further step on from that, why Facebook is a bit angry about it, is Apple's giving you some more choice on whether or not you want to share some of your data from your phone with various other companies, Facebook being one of those. Now, Facebook's basically attacked this move by Apple, saying that it's going to cruel small business, but it is giving users the choice. If you like the idea that you search for some new gum boots on your phone, and next thing you know, you see ads coming up from, say, Facebook about a whole range of gum boots, which people often experience that. If you're happy with that, then fine. Share your data, and Apple can still let your data go across to Facebook. But if you don't want that to happen, then don't share your data, and then Facebook doesn't have access to it. Facebook's angry because obviously they rely on all this data to be able to sell their advertising. The more data Facebook can get, the more targeted the advertising can be to exactly what you as an individual wants, and so that makes it more effective to sell advertising. Mark Zuckerberg's reportedly said that his company needs to, and I quote here, needs to inflict pain on Apple because of this particular move from Apple, so they're not happy about it. They've even taken out full-page ads in the Wall Street Journal saying what a terrible move this is. So I'm not convinced that it's terrible. They're trying to pitch it as being terrible for small business. I'm convinced it might be bad for Facebook's bottom line, but I'm not convinced it's going to be terrible for small businesses.
We are talking technology with Matthew Dickerson, and why could you soon lose the ability to use WhatsApp? I've used the app in the past. It's great.
It is great, and this is again going down that same process that we've almost just talked about there with Apple and Facebook. Facebook owns WhatsApp, but they want access to more data. So the policy that you agreed to when you used WhatsApp gave certain abilities for WhatsApp to do things. There's a new policy they've introduced that allows WhatsApp to share a lot more information with Facebook, surprisingly enough, given the fact that they own both. Now, Facebook or WhatsApp is saying, if you don't agree to this new policy, well, you're meant to have lost the ability to keep using WhatsApp on February 8th. But there was such a backlash, I suppose, from people around the world that they've extended that deadline out to May 15. If you don't accept the new policy by May 15, then WhatsApp says that you'll be able to receive calls and notifications for a short time. You won't be able to read or send messages. And after 120 days, your account will be deleted. So it's a bit of a strong-handed tactic from Facebook to try and make sure they're getting enough data. Elon Musk put out a tweet and said, well, if WhatsApp's going to do this, why not use another app called Signal? Now, not many people had heard Signal, but when Elon Musk tweets something, which goes to tens of millions of his followers, then people sit up and listen. The share price jumped up for Signal. There were so many downloads of Signal that their infrastructure struggled to cope. So I think what Facebook is learning very quickly with the issues with news in Australia, with things like this with WhatsApp, with their argument with Apple, is that if you want to try and push the public too far, they will just jump ship. So there's probably some backpedaling that Facebook's got to do around a few of these things, and the WhatsApp process might be one of them.
And what is the newest feature from Microsoft Word in their bid to keep up to date with Google Docs?
It is funny saying that keeping up to date with Google Docs. When Google Docs was first introduced, it was a big battle for them to try and catch up to Microsoft Word or the various Microsoft applications. But to have it around the other way now, it shows you how quickly things change in the tech world. So Microsoft Word is finally getting text predictions. Many people are familiar with this on their mobile phone. It starts to put the text in for each word so you don't have to type the whole word out. Google Docs has had that for some time. And finally, the next iteration of Microsoft Word, which is due out in March, the next update of that, will feature this. So essentially, you'll be typing away, and as you type the first few letters of a word, it'll use some AI in the background and predict what you want to say. So you can just hit the tab key to finish typing the rest of that word. For fast typers, probably not that big an advantage. It's probably faster for them to keep typing. For single-digit typists, people that use their single digit on each hand, then this will probably be a nice welcome addition. But again, it does show that there's competition in all parts of technology, and having competition with Google Docs and Microsoft Word is a great thing, because it just means we get better and better features.
And lastly this morning, Matthew, how did the Facebook news ban impact the App Store charts?
Well, interestingly enough, ABC News did a fantastic job. ABC News, on all of their websites, when people would access anything on ABC News, it would pop up and say, head to your favourite, the Google Play or App Store, head to wherever you get your apps from, and download the ABC News app, because you can't see it on Facebook anymore. And so consequently, ABC News, the app, went to the top of the download charts in, for example, the App Store. Even now, it's still sitting at number 2. So again, this reaction from Facebook to ban all news sites, which was trying to put some pressure on the government, then someone like ABC News, very proactive about that, and before you know it, they're at the top of the download chart. And so people are saying, well, forget about Facebook, we'll just go straight to the news source rather than rely on Facebook to direct us to some of those news sources. We'll go straight there. Now, Facebook has said they are going to back down on that news ban. The government's been in discussions with them about it. But again, I think they learned from this that ban news, try and basically make the government look silly. I think at the end of it all, Facebook looked pretty silly, and people worked out other ways around it. So Facebook's convenient to get your news on, but if they're going to ban it, people will just go elsewhere to get their news. I don't think they're going to jump up and down against our government. I think the majority of citizens in Australia were supporting the government, and in fact, a lot of the governments around the world were supporting our government because they wanted to see how this turned out.
All right, Matthew, we'll leave it there. Of course, 2WEB listeners can view your great videos on YouTube. Have a great week. We'll talk again next Wednesday.
Looking forward to it, Chris.